Lebanon's worst sectarian violence in decades. At least 7 killed as protests descend into deadly clashes. Could the country be heading for another civil war? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is the unrest in Lebanon. Already a nation in crisis, Lebanon is once again in mourning as the country confronts its latest tragedy. On Thursday, a mostly sectarian demonstration against a judge investigating the Beirut blast turned deadly when snipers opened fire on protesters. Terrified children were shielded from gunfire while the elderly were whisked away to safety. Men with machine guns and RPGs were firing as civilians scrambled for places to hide. It was some of the worst violence Beirut had seen for 30 years, and President Bachar El-Halabi declared it would never happen again.
I have made contact with the relevant parties today to address what happened and, most importantly, to make sure that it never happens again, knowing that this will not happen again regardless of circumstances. Armed forces did their duty and will continue to do so and maintain security, stability and civil rest. We will not allow anyone to take the country hostage to their own interests.
It all started with protests against Tariq Bitar, the judge leading the investigation into last year's deadly Beirut blast that killed 218 people and destroyed thousands of homes. Bitar is popular with the victims' families as a man looking for justice, but to Hezbollah and its allies, he's on a witch hunt. Under his leadership, the probe is investigating several high-profile politicians, including the former finance minister and senior Amal official, Ali Hassan Khalil. But now an investigation will take place into the protests and the scenes that followed. For many, including Prime Minister Najib Mikati, it was a reminder of the Lebanese civil war that devastated the country.
I wish they would remember the civil war, so they realize how the civil war affected Lebanon, with tens of thousands of victims. And what was the result? At the end, we will sit around the table and agree between each other, and all the Lebanese should be together. Today it is different in a positive way due to the presence of the Lebanese army, which proved it was capable of maintaining security and stopping deterioration.
Well, many fear Lebanon could once again be heading in that direction. Let's look at how the civil war started, some of its key moments, and what it did to the country. In 1975, gunmen from the Christian Kataib Party attacked a bus in Beirut, killing 27 mostly Palestinians en route to a refugee camp. With that, the civil war had begun. 3 years later, Israel invaded Lebanon to battle Palestinian guerrilla groups. By 1982, Israeli troops had made their way to the Lebanese capital, forcing the Syrian army out. Christian militia groups working with Israel stormed the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps, killing hundreds, if not thousands, of mainly Palestinian civilians. That same year, Iran formed Hezbollah in Lebanon. In 1983, Beirut signed a peace agreement with Israel, but it was never formally ratified. In 1989, most of Lebanon's parliament headed to Saudi Arabia to try to reach a resolution. They agreed to constitutional reform and a sectarian-based government. The president would be a Christian, the prime minister Sunni, and the speaker of parliament a Shia. Now, while that agreement brought an end to a war that killed more than 150,000 people, that same system is also blamed for the economic and political disaster in Lebanon today. With rival factions all part of the government, consensus or even compromise is hard to come by, and the political elite is accused of working for themselves instead of the people. Well, to discuss the current crisis in Lebanon, I am joined now from Beirut by journalist Jad Ghosn, who specializes in Lebanese politics. Also in the Lebanese capital is Mona Alami, a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council's Rafik Hariri Center for the Middle East. And Bachar El-Halabi joins us from Istanbul. He's a Middle East and North Africa analyst at Clipper Data. Thanks all so much for being with us. You know, the violence started with a protest against the judge investigating the Beirut port blast. The country as a whole has demanded those responsible be held to account, but we're seeing now how even the earliest stages of the investigation have led to civil war-like conditions on the streets of Beirut. Jad Ghosn, how can there be any hope for transparency or resolution if Lebanon can't get past even the initial phases of an investigation without people dying?
Unfortunately, one can say there is no hope if there is no criteria revolving around the state to solve our political problems. Then our history tells us in Lebanon that we are prone to violence, where we have a system of confessionalism and ex-militias still carrying and holding some small weapons, let's say, and even others like Hezbollah having big weaponry armaments. So if the state isn't the center of gravity to which one would turn for a peaceful resolution of conflicts, one would fear that our disintegration of the state since our financial crisis in 2019 that has still not been resolved, not a bit at least, will lead us to more conflicts of the same that we saw yesterday.
You know, Mona, what's remarkable is that even while they're charged with corruption and that they're widely seen as responsible for bringing the country to this state of desperation now, people are still so fiercely loyal to their sectarian political leaders. Why is that?
I don't agree with what you've just said. I think that in 2019 there was an awakening of the people that asked actually that accused the political elite of being a mafia. And however, the protests were cracked down. There was not wide international support for the protest. And at the end of the day, people went into survival mode because of the economic crisis. However, if you look a little bit at the little statistics we have, the party popularity is really gone down in the last few years. However, the parties are still capable to mobilize a large number of people because there is a silent minority that's first priority now is to survive the economic crisis and provide for its family. There's
okay, but Mona, can you help us better then understand what were the dynamics yesterday? Those protesters, sectarian-based protesters that were out there protesting against a judge who they feel is specifically targeting Shia officials. If that's not sectarianism and they're showing their loyalty to their sect.
Definitely. I'm not saying that these parties are not able to mobilize a large number of people, but if you're able to mobilize 10,000 or 2,000 or 3,000, this does not mean that you're still representative of the 2 million people who are generally your popular base. So yes,
I'm not saying they're widely representative, but they are still there, and they're ready to go out and fire weapons to defend.
Because you have to understand that these parties have been for 40 years in power. They have used the states, they have employed people, they have put them in positions, they have employed their families. Hezbollah has tens of thousands of fighters whose family will go down in the street to support them. So yes, definitely these two parties are capable of mobilizing a large number of people. But if you talk to the youth, yesterday I was talking to a little bit of the youth, Shiite youth. There is a clash between what their elders think and what they think. The younger think that yes, the Judge Bitar has a right to go after the truth and to bring truth to bring answers to the people who were killed in the Beirut port blast, and we're talking about over 219 people and over 7,000 injured. So there is I think a division within what the young people think and what the older people who are more loyal to the parties believe.
Okay. Bachar, let me ask you, are judges biased? Are those officials being summoned by Judge Bitar, for example, the actual victims of political targeting, as Hezbollah claims?
So one small highlight that I'd like to make before delving into that question is that even yesterday we saw at least the videos that surfaced on the screens of our phones and in laptops showed us young men in military gear firing in the streets of Beirut. So this is definitely a very bad signal that, and a very worrisome one that shows you how recyclable civil war in Lebanon can be, or at least the remnants or the semblance of a civil war can loom directly its head into the political scene in order to translate that into political gains among the power sharing arrangement. However, going back to the question around the judiciary, I wouldn't I wouldn't simply say or directly accuse the Lebanese judiciary as a whole as a full entity to be biased. I wouldn't say that it's completely subjugated by the political and the sectarian ruling elite. However, I would say that the sectarian ruling elite has a large sway over the Lebanese judiciary. We know that they can exercise power, they can exercise violence, as we saw in the streets of Beirut yesterday and prior to that. And we saw, and any person can be threatened one way or the other. Mind you that the sectarian ruling elite in the country as well hold the keys to judges' appointments as well. So this makes them compromised in a way. But at the same time, we know that there are honest judges. We know that there are honest public servants, and the Judge Bitar has showed us up until now, at least in his track record, that he is trying to merely do his job and what his TOR dictates. However, and just another highlight that I'd like to make, so far Judge Bitar has not only summoned Shia political figures, he's summoned Sunni political figures, and he's summoned other Christian
well.
political figures. Yes, so the accusation of Judge Bitar being simply biased against Shia does not really hold. However, it seems like the Hezbollah mainly is taking into its own hands at least the attempt to try and obstruct justice in a way. However, all the other, or most of the other implicated sectarian ruling elite has also tried one way or the other to obstruct justice as well.
Okay. Jad, let me ask you, I mean, is it naive to ask if you can ensure pure impartiality on behalf of any and all investigators into the Beirut blast? Or are there always going to be, is there always going to be a dispute over where their biases, if they have them, might lie?
Yeah, one will try to answer questions that are answerable. Anyone can put some doubts in any judicial process. The issue is not here. The issue is that parts and parcels of our confessional system, so it's Hezbollah, it's Amal movement, it's Future movement, it's all the other parties, have been in the national unity government since 1990, or at least 2005 with the Syrian withdrawal from Lebanon. So if we have a problem with our judicial system, it's caused because of these powers that have held hostage the whole judiciary system for them to be not accountable to anything. So when now we have a judge in his investigation trying to accuse, we're still at the accusation phase, some political figures. We see all the political and now security troubles that we have in Lebanon. But when the judiciary was asleep for 30 years on all the corruption in Lebanon, even the assassinations in Lebanon, we didn't see any demonstrations, we didn't see any problems with such a high level of blood threats, let's say. So the problem is that it's not the corruption of our judicial system that is causing all the troubles in the streets. It's if a judge tries to have any effect on any political process, even if this effect is coming from his job to do, which is trying to have these politicians accountable for their actions, that's not permissible in Lebanon. That's why the high stakes that have been put by Hezbollah, by Amal movement, even by the Future movement, and other political parties against this judge. But at the same time, one has to look at the whole picture when other confessional political parties, like the accused till now, the Lebanese forces, accused of shooting protesters yesterday, which is also a big part of our problem.
Let me move on to another layer of this then. Mona, I'll come back to you. You know, it took the army some time to actually get there and to get the situation under control, but they did in the end. Let me ask you if the army is seen as kind of the reliable peacekeeper in Lebanon, or does it have any dangerous sectarian divides as well?
Yeah. I actually look. The army is playing a very important role. The Lebanese state is failing, and the Lebanese army is the last institution that is still holding. However, it's been exhausted by the crisis. A lot of people, a lot of soldiers have deserted. The Lebanese army also is caught in a dilemma. It is supposed to maintain stability. However, it has to be perceived as a neutral player. So whenever clashes like that happen, it tries to hold the balance without intervening without appearing to take the side of one party or the other. So it's in a very difficult position.
It sounds it is in a difficult position. Bachar, let me ask you, but it does seem, as Mona was alluding, that it has the respect of the Lebanese people. So how difficult is it for the army to maintain the peace in Lebanon? And on the other side of that, I need to ask you, on what grounds or what right did anyone have to bring firearms, RPGs and machine guns to this demonstration in the first place?
Well, in regards to peace in Lebanon, among different sectarian constituencies, it always boils back down to a political decision and agreement among the different sectarian leaders. And this is when it translates into peace on the streets. This is when it translates into better relations with the international community, with the Lebanon surroundings, and with probably trying to attract investments and probably tourists. And everyone knows the drill. But it always goes back to a political decision. We know that in Lebanon, the Lebanese army continues to garner respect among a considerable size or chunk of the Lebanese society. I wouldn't say that the entire Lebanese society actually sees the army and from one single lens, because as you adhere to in your question, the Lebanese army continues to be as well a reservoir for public for employment by the different sectarian ruling elites, and also, and this is something that needs to be highlighted, the fact that the head of the chief of the staff basically is a Christian figure, by convention has to be a Christian figure. This always puts the chief of staff in a place of political ambition. And precedent showed us that over the past, or at least in the post-war era, 3 army chief of staffs went on to become basically presidents of the republic. So it's a very delicate balance that the army plays usually, and the senior officials in the army play in order to maintain peace and security. It boils back also to the a political agreement among the different rulers. And in regards to the second question, can you please remind me?
The proliferation, really, of weapons. And I asked what right did anyone have to have RPGs and machine guns at this rally?
Well, I mean, I'll answer this on 2 levels. On the first level, unfortunately, the disintegration of the Lebanese state, the lack of state institutions, and even the lack of rule of law, which always comes below the rule of the sect and the rule of the tribes in the country, allows for everyone to be armed in Lebanon. Literally everyone or carries at least personal arms in Lebanon in order to maintain what they perceive as their own security. And this is a result of the disintegration of the state or the lack of state institutions in general. On the other level, we know that Hezbollah mainly is a heavily armed and financed militia in Lebanon that has its own regional ambitions, goals, and it's also an extension of the IRGC in Iran, and it plays by that rule in general. And over the past few years, or at least what translated in the streets of Beirut yesterday, is also divided on 2 levels. One level relates to the probe into the Beirut blast, but also the other level shows you that the different sectarian constituencies in the country have had enough with the sectarian tension, or at least with one side being heavily armed and way more equipped than any other side. And it often uses its extra power in order to impose its will on the political process in the country, unfortunately.
Okay. And Jad, you know, you've spoken about this before, but as the destabilization seems to be getting worse, how much might foreign powers step up, welcome or not, to protect their interests now in Lebanon. Already we're hearing Iran blaming Israel. Do you fear that could spiral further?
Yeah, one would have to know that in the first place, our confessional and sectarian political parties are all related to foreign countries or foreign interests in the first place. So the whole region is our political actors in Lebanon. The disintegration of the state and the disappearance of any central authority to try to navigate between the foreign interest in order to have the national interest at the first hand is already behind us. Now the whole fear is that with the continuing disintegration of the state as an administration, but also as the security forces in Lebanon, with our financial crisis, there is a real fear that the whole peace in Lebanon is only maintained by a regional decision and a regional political say, not by any internal mechanism, but some sort of balance of power and some sort of fear of going back to a bloody experience that we had in this country for 15 years. But we don't have any official or legal or legitimate mechanism is internally now, with the absence of the state as the main political player in the country.
Okay, Mona, if you have some thoughts on the proxy powers at play here, go ahead. If not, I'd like to move on to another issue with you.
Yeah, definitely. I think that Lebanon, the last few years, has really fallen into under the control of Iran. I think that the United States is trying to push back a little bit by supporting the Lebanese army, which is, as Jad said, is really perceived as the last line of defense that we might have. So we've seen some intervention from the United States at the level of the electricity, to provide electricity from Jordan. We've seen some support to the Lebanese army, but Lebanon as a whole has fallen under the control of Iran. And this, in a country that has so many different sects, makes it a dangerous, a dangerous combination, because there's going to be a lot of pushback.
Okay. Bashar, if you want to comment, go ahead. If not, I have a question for you. Go ahead.
Very quickly, I would be very basically cautious with completely saying or announcing that Lebanon has fallen under Iran's complete hegemony and control, because at the end of the day, yesterday the American Undersecretary of State was in Beirut. He was meeting with different actors. She was meeting with different actors. We know that other countries like France, like the US and other Gulf countries continue to hold sway over political actors and key figures in the country. And it might be that their control is diminishing in favor of the Iranian control, but Lebanon right now cannot be announced or claimed to be completely under Iran's hegemony. That's my two cents.
Just quickly, I want everyone's kind of final thoughts on this. We've heard the top-tier leaders, obviously, in Lebanon say that nobody wants a return to civil war, that they remember the civil war in Lebanon and how destructive it was for the country and its people. But, I mean, Bashar, you in particular, and Mona had said that you'd alluded to a young population in Lebanon that might not remember that civil war very clearly. And it's a memory that might deter some from ever wanting to go down that very dangerous path again. But if they don't have that memory, obviously, is there a danger that the youth might forge a different path and feel that there is a need to fight? Go ahead, Bashar, quick final words.
Absolutely, and this is my greatest fear. Yesterday, I was going through my social media timeline, and literally everyone who's 40 and above was talking about the trauma that was awakened within them, and how they're trying to explain to their kids that this is something they lived through, and they had hoped and promised themselves that their kids would not live through as well. But unfortunately, we see that Lebanon continues to basically deny its own citizens and residents from any semblance of a genuine and a decent life. And it seems that the current economic crisis and the deterioration of the state in general will only fuel unemployment, and it will fuel the younger generations out of frustration to take things into their hands if a political solution is not reached in Lebanon.
Okay, Jad, quickly, final thoughts?
Yeah, I have to second what Bashar said. The issue is that when the youth in Lebanon falls into hopelessness again after cracking down on the demonstration that began in 2019, and after the political class in Lebanon 2 years after this big protests have been able to reinvigorate themselves as a ruling class once again. The fall in despair will lead into a big exile from Lebanon, which we are witnessing every day. And those who remain in Lebanon would either fall into hopelessness and retreat from politics, or being held hostage by the clientelistic channels that we have, led by political parties who, in the first place, reached power by being a militia through the civil war that happened between 1975 and 1990. So this is a game that they know playing quite well.
Jad Ghosn, Mona Alami, Bachar El-Halabi, thank you all so much for being with us on this edition of The Newsmakers. Greatly appreciated. And thanks to our viewers as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter at @the_newsmakers, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. I'll see you next time.